Hello and welcome to another episode of Despite the Challenges, a show where we showcase amazing people who, despite their devastating challenges, impeding circumstances, find strength and ways to overcome them. Today, my guest is a young man who had a heart attack at the very tender age of 13 that changed his life entirely. Since then, how he has turned around his life and has shaped lives of countless other people around the world. My guest today is Joseph Encinia. Let's hear Joseph's story from him. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ritu. Thank you.
Okay, so tell us.
Well, my story, it's a dramatic one. It starts at the age of 8. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 8 years old. From the time when I was a young boy, I had a lot of joint conditions, was in and out of physical therapy, and I started to notice in my early childhood, whenever I was outside playing with friends or my brother, I would come home, my joints would be swollen, my parents would kind of get a little scared by it, and so after some time they took me to the hospital and I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at 8 years old. And from that moment on, my life was pretty much full of medication and treatment just to control the condition. I was put on a few anti-inflammatories, I was put on some painkillers, and as some medication does, it gives side effects, and so I was put on more medication. And I believe that it all led to my heart attack because my whole biochemistry was mixed up at a young age to put so much into the body to take care of oneself.
So you were going to school?
I was going to school, yes.
Continuing same life as any other young child?
Yes, it wasn't the same life as any young child.
Understood.
It was a tough life. I'm a twin. I have a twin brother, and my twin brother was always super athletic. Into sports, good looking, muscular, and I was the one who was out of shape, overweight, depressed, and usually in bed on meds for most of my teenage and childhood. And at the age of 13, when I had the heart attack, everything from there just went dark, it went downward. I was put on more medication, and at that point I was in, it was right before my high school year, so.
Did you understand what was happening to you?
I did not understand what was happening. It was, the moment it happened, it totally, it took me back. It's hard to remember when you have a heart attack, but I remember being a young boy and being sick, and my mother was treating me. She thought I was having a cold. I was having a hard time breathing. My respiration was a little labored throughout the day. But as the evening progressed, and it was around midnight that I had the heart attack, as the evening progressed, I was having a tougher time breathing. And it came to the moment where I took a deep breath, and I just felt this huge pain in my chest. And from that moment on, every breath was getting heavier and heavier, as if an elephant was sitting on your chest.
Was anyone around you had any idea it could be something else?
Not at all. No,
not at all.
No.
So it was kind of an absolute surprise to everyone.
It was. Like I said, my mother thought I had a cold or a summer flu, just something, rest in bed, have some medication. But when she visited me in my bed a few times throughout the night, she noticed my face was turning colors, getting blue, my breath was getting labored. And we jumped in the car, and the heart attack happened while I was in the car on the way to the hospital with my mother.
Okay. It must be so difficult for all of you, especially because it's not the age that anyone can even imagine having a heart attack. When was that your mother or you found out? I mean, sure, you would have not known until you came back to your full recovery or consciousness, or when did she find out?
Well, the second we went to the hospital, she pulled the car up. She tells me I was unconscious, right into the emergency doors, and from there they admitted me straight to the intensive care unit, and and dealt with my heart attack. Brought me back through medication, nitroglycerin, a stent through my femoral artery into the heart. And I was brought back, and after that I was in shock. I spent 2 months in the intensive care unit.
I imagine. Yes.
Yes.
So it's really uncommon to hear someone having a heart attack at this age. And anytime you come across someone who had a heart attack, usually people have this assumption either your diet or hereditary factor have led to it, or your lifestyle had led to that heart attack. Right? It's going back to your RA and the medication that you were taking. So what was the advice that came from medical professionals at that time? How you tried to maneuver from that point on?
Well, the diagnosis wasn't ever clear. I had 2 cardiologists, a pediatric and an adult cardiologist, because of the rarity of having a heart attack at the age of 13. It's not common. And a lot of it was attributed to my heredity.
Okay.
And some of it was contributed to diet or just, social factors, living factors. But what I felt on the inside was it was the medication. It was all the medication I was taking. And so I never really got a true diagnosis. And after the heart attack, well, I was put on more medication. I was too young to make my own decisions. I was 13. So my mother was doing the best she could, following the doctor's advice. And I was put on a couple more medications. So by the time I was 13, after the heart attack, I was taking 5 types of pills a day.
And you mentioned that you grew up in Texas.
I grew up in Texas, yes.
And your twin brother did not have any of the health symptoms that you were experiencing?
Not at all, not at all. Usually when there is twins, for those twins that are out there viewing, usually one is healthy and one has kind of the unhealthy gene. Like a runt of the litter. And so my brother was super healthy.
How did that make you feel as not being able to do normal things at the same time, not knowing what's happening to you?
It was depressing. It was sad. It was in a dark place in my life at that time. I had not too many friends. I was always constantly comparing myself to my brother, who was very fit, and we were twins. And so it was tough, because he had the friends, he had the social life where after school I was going to physical therapy to deal with my arthritis, and so I didn't really have the same type of social life as a normal teenager did. And it was super tough.
Besides your mother, were there any other caregivers in your life, and to give you that kind of motivation and a support?
Well, physical therapist, my doctors. I went to great hospitals in Texas, in Dallas, where I'm from, the Dallas Children's Hospital and the Dallas Scottish Rite Hospital for Children. And my physical therapist and even the rheumatologist and my cardiologist, they were all super supportive and in me healing, but just not in the way that I found it eventually.
Okay, so and so much is going on at that time. You're growing up, young man. There's so much aspiration, so much every person is wanting to have in life, and life shapes up, right? It's already confusing for you, devastating for you, depressing. Putting this all together and just making sense out of it is already hard enough. And finding your way out of that, what were the turning points?
Well, the turning points were, when I finally became responsible for myself. That was the turning point. About 18 years old, yeah.
Okay.
When I was, going to university, I left home, I was working, I was still on medication like I was normally, still in the same shape. I was actually 50 pounds more than I weigh now at the time. I was a little overweight.
Yes, you mentioned that.
Yeah. And so it wasn't until I was about 18 years old in college and I was a young man. Like any young man, I was looking to make myself feel good about myself, work on my self-esteem and confidence. And like any young man, hopefully I can find a relationship with a pretty young lady. And so I figured, what's the best thing I can do? And I tried exercise. That's what I thought right away. Well, let me start exercising and just really pushing the envelope. And I tried many methods, and eventually yoga is what came to be what healed me. But I've tried things like running, and in the beginning I felt like, having had a heart attack, I was going to have another heart attack. I tried weightlifting, but with the arthritis and the joint pain, it was just too much on my joints, and I would swell tremendously after a session. But it wasn't until I found yoga that my life changed, in the practice of Hatha yoga.
So yoga itself is an ancient practice. Yoga, I have tried myself as pretty young, and not even thinking of that I need to do yoga because of this. This was sort of a mandatory physical training class in a elementary school. So and ever since I have heard people doing tremendously beneficial ways practicing yoga, but somehow due to an accident and injuries, I always hesitated to do yoga. Always thinking, I don't want to hurt myself more. And for someone in your situation, where you, like you said, joint pain, because of if you run, you do any kind of other aerobics, there's always some sort of side effect. How did yoga perform different for you than anything else that you had tried?
Well, the style of yoga that I try and that I practice and that I teach is hot yoga, Bikram yoga. And the room is heated, our yoga room, to 105 degrees. So the heat I found, taking the class in the heat, was good for the joints. It really loosened me up. And I remember it probably being one of the toughest things I've ever did in my life, because I never stretched. I was tight. I had a limited range of motion in so many of my joints, especially my knees. And it was the toughest thing I did. I actually walked out of the class a few times just to say I need a break because it was intense. And the teacher encouraged me to come back in, was very patient with me. And afterwards, the friend that took me to the class was, she was a great friend, and we started going out for drinks and smoothies and juices after class. So it became a really nice, healthy thing for me to do. And after about a week of doing that, just for the social aspect of it and for the way it was making me feel, after about a week I was sold on, this is the medicine I need to take for the rest of my life. And I felt so many effects from it, so many effects.
So it's the physical benefit that you were getting. What else?
Well, in the beginning, mostly was what I felt was the physical benefit. I remember that night I had the best night's sleep because I worked so hard in this yoga class. I woke up with little joint pain and stiffness in my body, and I really started to notice that I was standing straighter. Now, the other effect it gave me was a lot with my self-esteem. In the yoga, when I practice, in the yoga rooms that I practice in, it's surrounded by mirrors, because the yoga technique that I learn is very focused on alignment and technique. So we must look at ourselves the entire time, and the classes are usually an hour and a half. And so for the first time in my life, I had to look at myself for an hour and a half and face the reality of, this is my body, this is what's happened to it, these are the conditions I have, this is who I am. I had to face the things that made me, self-conscious and maybe not so confident. And it was interesting because the more I faced myself, I noticed it right away, within a month, automatically I was able to start smiling at myself. And to feel good about, in the morning when I looked at myself in the mirror and was getting dressed, I wasn't so self-conscious because of all the conditions I've had. For me, looks was a huge thing growing up because I was always comparing myself to my brother. When I started doing yoga, though, it wasn't so much about looks. It was just being able to learn how to accept looking at myself for an hour and a half. So
in other words, when you are practicing yoga, merely for the reasons of getting better, and you're finding other benefits, such as self-realization, at the same time introspection. And like you said, your confidence level changed. talk a little bit more
Well, it
about
changed
that.
dramatically. I never played any sports in my whole life. I was always like, I was not allowed to, even throughout my high school years. After the heart attack, I wasn't allowed to even be stressed out in school. So it was great for my grades. Like I was making easy grades automatically because I would just put my hand on my heart and the teachers would laugh. But I wasn't allowed to play sports or anything. So when I started yoga, I had this new ability, this newfound flexibility and strength that I was getting really excited with. And at the moment, and in Texas, there was a yoga asana championship, a regional
Okay.
competition for yoga asana, which was being hosted by the USA Yoga Federation, a nonprofit organization. And I thought at first, like, how do you compete in yoga? Like, that was interesting because they promoted it at the studio. And I was intrigued by it because I was never a sportsman, but I was really into yoga. And, I thought the idea was kind of an oxymoron, like it doesn't make sense, but I was encouraged to by my teachers who said, hey, have you ever been on stage? Have you ever performed? Like you're having this newfound lease on life and health, and maybe you should, express it and share it. And so I said, okay, sure. And I prepared with my friends at the yoga studio for this regional championship. It was in Texas. We all drove to another city together. And I was so intimidated because a lot of the yogis that were, in this exhibition of yoga asana demonstration, the postures, were in very good shape. Maybe have had a gymnast or a dance background. And here was I who had no athletic background, was barely, still had a little bit of a belly, a little punch, and was a little out of shape and overweight. And I was there with them competing, and so I did the championship. And when you do your routine, it's a 3-minute routine of doing the positions, and I fell a lot. I fell so much that even the audience gasped a few times because I was trying things I never tried.
Okay.
And I quickly, finished my routine and bowed and ran off the stage. But the moment that it really affected me was during the awards ceremony. I got last place, obviously, because I was very amateur in it. And I could tell I was last because I looked at the scores. But instead of feeling depressed or maybe sorry for myself, I was standing there with the rest of the participants and competitors, and they looked so good, and I felt so accomplished just from doing that. I puffed my chest up and sucked the stomach in and said, okay, next year I'm going to win. And it wasn't until a few years later, continuously doing that I came to this new level of this new body, this new level of health that really allowed me to win this competition. And so this competition started to become kind of the thing that drove me to really push my practice and my healing, because right there I saw that something was possible.
So that's another turning point in your life.
That was the second huge turning point. The first one was finding the yoga, and the second one was joining the yoga championships, the asana competition.
Were you still taking medication?
At that time, yes.
You were?
Yes, I was.
So with this another determination and some new direction in your life to go on and compete, how did that change everything that you were doing at that time? Your college education, people around you, your mother, your family members, and their responses. What was happening?
Well, all the determination from that, and it really led to me learning how to exercise more discipline and self-control, which I really noticed with my school and work and family, like a huge increase of, in school I was studying music and I was just becoming a better student. In work I was getting promoted. I do play guitar. I studied classical guitar, and in work I was, a young guy, so I was in retail, but I was promoted right away. I just noticed that from practicing yoga and developing this strong determination through the practice, my self-control became huge, the discipline, self-discipline. And from there, so many other things opened up. I was able to get off my medication after 2 years of being able to focus on eating healthy, exercising, practicing yoga consistently, meditating, practicing breath control exercises, and that all comes from discipline. You can't do that without self-control or discipline. But once I started doing that, after about 2 years into my yoga journey, I was able to get off all my medication.
Completely.
Completely. I lost over 50 pounds. And that was the next big turning point. There's a lot of big jumps in my story, but that right there was huge to finally get off of that.
I want to hear about your touring around the world. You mentioned you have gone to many, many different countries.
Yes.
And you were teaching yoga when you were traveling. So when did you decide to become instructor or teacher?
I became a yoga instructor about 3 years into my practice. So about a year off of medication, a year feeling light as ever and happy as ever, I decided I want to share this. I need to share this. I have to share this.
Did you complete graduation?
I didn't, unfortunately. I didn't complete the level of degree I wanted to because I just found that my path was going more and more into this healing art of yoga. And so I did, I left school. I ran to Hawaii for 3 months and completed my yoga training there in Hawaii. It was beautiful. Became a teacher and started just teaching mostly in my hometown of Dallas, Texas. It was huge. I gave back to my community, and Texas is known for a lot of health problems, especially with obesity and heart disease. And so it was really nice to go back and start teaching students there, something that I've learned and I've dealt with in my life.
Why did you choose students?
Why did I choose?
Students. You were teaching to young school and college students.
Well, a lot of them was mostly because this yoga studio was right next to a university.
Oh, I see.
In Dallas, so we had a lot. But I also taught adults too. I was teaching a lot of professionals, but a lot of students because it's a yoga studio next to a university.
Okay.
But a lot of adults too. And it wasn't until a few years after I really was rooted into my teaching that I started traveling. And when I started traveling because at that time in the yoga sport, I became a world champion.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It took me about 7 years from that first competition to get to this point.
Where you had third place.
Yes.
The first time.
Yes, where I had last place.
Last place. Okay.
And then, so about 7 years later, I became a 3-time national U.S. champion and a world champion. And so that opened up so many doors for travel.
A true inspiration to many others.
It was great.
And Joseph, today our lifestyles, majority of the young people, especially when we see younger generation, as we age, yes, the health problem kind of pile up, but even many young children are suffering from a lot of health problems. I know when we spoke, you mentioned that you do yoga camps for young children, and you are right now in New York City. Would you like to share with our viewers, what do you do?
Of course.
How does it impact you? What your motivation is for the young people, and how you want to guide them through your practice, what you have gone through, and what you teach?
Of course. Well, so after I traveled all over the world teaching yoga, and that was a very fun trip. I came back here to New York, where my wife works. She's a professional dancer, and I started teaching regularly here in New York. And I was getting a lot of requests for kids yoga from because I was teaching a lot more adults here, a lot more professionals in New York City, and so I was getting a lot of requests about kids yoga, and it started really inspiring me. And I started to think about, well, what if I had yoga when I was a kid? Would I have gone through all of that, And I wouldn't take all that away because I wouldn't be who I am now without having gone through that. But how much of a different process or an easier process would it have been to heal if I had yoga when I was a kid? So I started really thinking about this idea of giving back to kids, and started teaching yoga after school at an elementary school. I have a good friend who's a principal, and she brought me in, and that was the beginning of it. I started teaching yoga at an elementary school after school once a week, and that's evolved to becoming now Our nonprofit is called the Yoga Youth Movement. It's a nonprofit status pending at the moment because we're still developing. And currently we're having a summer camp for it. And right now we have kids from all over the New York City area coming and spending 3 days a week with me, and we do 3 hours of yoga. It's not only like the hatha physical yoga, but it's also a lot of leadership. And I feel that both of those gifts is what yoga has given me. It's given me the physical and the mental. And so with the kids, that's what I'm focusing on mostly, is the physical and mental, and the type of kids, mostly teenagers, because at that in those teenage years is when you're really developing who you're going to turn into as an adult.
Absolutely.
And reaching the kids now in their teenage years between the ages of 11 and 17, it's the best. It's the most fun work I've ever done, and I just love doing it.
Do you find difference teaching young kids comparing to the adults?
Yes, it's a huge difference. I mean, with my
Do they follow better, or it's hard?
It just depends. With my adult classes, I find that they're easier to keep in line, and everybody, let's move together and let's be consistent with each other while we practice. But with the kids, I mean, ages 11 through 17, and in this day of modern technology and just so much distractions around them, it can become a challenge. But so we don't allow them to bring their cell phones to the yoga class, and but what I've noticed is in the beginning, they are more difficult than the adults, but they advance a lot quicker than the adults. To see the kids advance, it's like 10 times as fast.
They're grasping.
Yeah, they're so open. You know, in the beginning, it's a challenge to get them to listen, to sit still. But I've realized that once they start feeling, oh, wow, I did a back bend today, or oh, wow, I did an arm balancing posture today. Like for the kids, they get so pumped up by that, and they go home and they'll show their parents all night long, and they'll come back, and I just see that their focus gets stronger, their concentration, and not only that, the faith in who they are themselves grows, and that's probably the most rewarding thing I've noticed.
We have a short clip for you performing. Let's take a look at a clip. Amazing. So I just want you to, as precisely, concisely, and in just few words, what you perform now, you can, with such a flexibility and such as those flexible movement of the body. Have you ever thought you will be able to do it?
Never.
No. What kind of message that you have for anyone who's watching?
Well, for anyone who's watching, when it comes to taking care of yourself, I found that you are responsible the most for you. You know, we have our family, we have our friends, we have our doctors and physicians, But at the end of the day, it's up to us to make the decisions that will lead us on a healthy lifestyle.
Message especially for the younger generation, especially kids that eating unhealthy. There's so much contamination of chemicals in the food, processed food, etc. So what is your message about the diet they have, besides the exercise, the diet?
Well, for the kids, my message on a diet is mostly we are what we eat. And if we choose to eat healthy, we choose to eat fresh, we choose to eat the best quality foods and ingredients we can have, then that's what our body's going to turn into.
Joseph, I really thank you sharing your story with us and with our viewers. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Ritu. Thank you so much.
I want to close this session with just a couple of motivating thoughts with our viewers. The doctrines and theories are the best for the weaker moments. In the moments of the strength, the problems are solved intuitively as if by themselves. Quote by Johannes Eiten. What I find reading that is that even though our challenges could be completely huge, difficult to overcome, any amount of motivations coming from outer external sources is not as much help as we find the strength inside us and take some steps. Another interesting quote that I like to share with you today is anything worthwhile involves some challenges and effort in order to obtain it. Never overlook the opportunities in your life just because they seem difficult to acquire. Achieving truly great prospects lie within your ability to seize the opportunity and develop your ideas. I thank you for joining us. Until next time, I am the host, Ritu Chopra, and you're watching Despite the Challenge.